My son spit on my face during Thanksgiving dinner because I refused to buy his wife a third luxury car. He wiped his mouth and laughed, thinking I was just a washed-up Gulf War veteran living off his charity. He forgot one small detail. The ranch house he lives in, the chair he sits on, and the oil equipment company where he plays CEO all have my name on the deed. He thought I was a burden. That night, I showed him I was the foundation. I didn't wipe the spit off my cheek. I just stood up, walked out into the freezing Dallas winter, and made one phone call that erased his entire existence. I sold his house. I took back every penny, and I never came back. Before I tell you how I destroyed my own son's life to teach him a lesson, let me introduce myself. My name is Theodore Ted Pierce. I'm 62 years old. To the world and to my ungrateful family, I'm a washed-up welder surviving on a VA pension and Social Security. I drive a 12-year-old Ford pickup that rattles when it goes over 45 mph. I shop at Walmart with coupons. I wear the same 3 work shirts I've owned since the late 90s. But appearances are the most dangerous lies we tell. What my son Anthony doesn't know is that I'm not just a retired welder. I'm the silent owner of Pierce Holdings, the shell company that owns his house, his cars, and the oil equipment supply firm where he acts like the big boss. I built this empire with calloused hands and sleepless nights after coming back from the Gulf War in 1991, and I hid it all to teach him the value of hard work, a lesson he clearly never learned. You see, I made a promise to myself when Anthony was born. I was 27, fresh out of the desert, with oil field experience from my Army Corps of Engineers service. I had $2,000 to my name and a dream. I swore my son would never know poverty like I did growing up in East Texas trailer parks. But I also swore he would never become soft. I would make him earn every dollar, every opportunity, every ounce of respect. I started small, welding pipe for oil rigs, 12-hour shifts in 110-degree heat. My hands were burned and scarred, my back aching every night. But I saved every penny. I bought 1 beat-up service truck, then 2, then a small warehouse. By the time Anthony was 10, I owned a fleet of 20 trucks and employed 15 men. By the time he was 20, I was pulling in $2.8 million a year in revenue, but Anthony never saw any of it. As far as he knew, his daddy was just Ted the welder who came home dirty and tired. When he asked for new shoes, I'd tell him we couldn't afford them. When he wanted expensive toys, I'd say we needed to save for groceries. I drove the same old truck. I wore the same work clothes. I clipped coupons and shopped clearance sales. Meanwhile, I was secretly paying for his private school tuition through a scholarship. I was funding his college education through an anonymous donor program. I was covering every expense of his privileged life while teaching him to believe we were poor. My late wife Margaret knew the truth. She used to argue with me about it, especially during her final years fighting cancer. "Ted," she'd say, her voice weak from chemotherapy, "you're going to create a monster. The boy needs to know the value of what he has." She was right. God rest her soul, she was right. When Margaret passed 4 years ago, Anthony didn't even take time off work to help plan the funeral. He showed up 10 minutes late to the service, checking his phone during the eulogy. He complained that the cemetery was too far from downtown and left immediately after the burial to make a business meeting. That business meeting was at the company I secretly owned, where he drew a $200,000 salary for doing work that any fresh college graduate could handle. But he strutted around that office like he built it brick by brick. The worst part? He started calling me old man around that time. Not dad, not even Ted. Old man. Like I was some burden he had to tolerate. In front of his friends, he'd joke about his senile father who still thinks it's 1975. He'd tell stories about how I embarrassed him at restaurants by asking for senior discounts, never mentioning that I was paying for every meal. But the real breaking point came gradually over the past year. The disrespect escalated from condescending comments to outright cruelty. At Anthony's 35th birthday party last spring, he introduced me to his country club friends as the plumber who raised me. When one of them asked about my military service, Anthony laughed and said, "Oh, he was just a mechanic in some desert, nothing heroic. I had served 18 months in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, maintaining the heavy equipment that kept our supply lines running. I had crawled under burning vehicles to fix hydraulics while Scud missiles fell around us. But to Anthony, I was just an embarrassment to his carefully constructed image of success. The night it all ended started with a text message. It was Thanksgiving. The North Texas wind was cutting through the streets of Dallas like a razor blade. It was 25 degrees. I was standing at the bus stop because my old truck wouldn't start. My phone buzzed. It was Anthony. "Don't be late again, old man. Sandra has friends coming over, and we don't want you embarrassing us." I looked at the text and felt that familiar ache in my chest. I had spent 2 hours in the cold earlier that day to get to the bank to withdraw $400. It was my monthly contribution to their grocery bill. They called it rent. I called it the price of seeing my grandchildren. When I arrived at the house, a sprawling 4-bedroom ranch in the most expensive district of North Dallas, the windows were glowing with warmth. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, remembering when I bought this place 12 years ago under an LLC. I pay the property taxes, $18,000 a year. I pay the insurance, $4,200 annually. I even pay the landscaping crew that keeps the lawn perfect, $800 monthly. Anthony thinks he owns it because I let him sign a lease agreement with a company he thinks is an anonymous landlord. He pays $0 a month. He calls it a perk of his executive job. I call it charity. I knocked on the door. Sandra opened it. She's 32, beautiful in a sharp plastic way, and has eyes that scan you for value like a price scanner. She was holding a glass of wine that cost more than my weekly food budget. "Oh, Ted," she sighed, blocking the doorway for a second too long. "You made it. We were betting on whether you'd get lost on the bus." She stepped back, not offering to take my heavy wet coat. I walked in, the warmth of the house hitting my frozen face. The smell of roasted turkey and cornbread stuffing filled the air. It smelled like the holidays I used to have with Margaret before everything became about maintaining this elaborate charade. Anthony was in the living room pouring drinks for a couple I didn't recognize. He looked the part of the successful executive. Tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, a Rolex on his wrist. A Rolex I paid for when I secretly covered his credit card debt 2 years ago. The debt was $47,000, accumulated from what he called business entertainment. I knew it was gambling and strip clubs because I had access to all his statements through the company accounting system. He saw me, and his smile dropped by a fraction. "Dad," he said, his voice loud and performative. "Glad you could drag yourself out here. Try not to touch the appetizers yet. We're waiting for the important guests." The important guests. That's how he always referred to his friends now, as if my presence somehow contaminated the air they breathed. These were oil executives whose companies regularly bought equipment from my firm. If they only knew that the senile old welder in the corner was the man who decided whether their projects got priority pricing. I went to the corner of the room and sat in a stiff leather chair, a $3,000 piece I had purchased through the house's furnishing account. My grandchildren, twin boys aged 8, were glued to their tablets. They barely looked up. "Hi, Grandpa," one mumbled. I wanted to hug them, to give them the candy bars I had in my pocket, but Sandra intercepted me before I could move. "Don't give them that cheap candy, Ted," she hissed, her voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. "It's full of sugar and chemicals. We only do organic." She looked at my jacket with disgust. "And honestly, couldn't you have bought something new? That coat smells like motor oil and desperation. It's embarrassing." I touched the sleeve of my jacket. It was a brown leather bomber, worn and weathered. It was the last jacket Margaret bought me before she passed away from cancer 4 years ago. She had picked it out at the military surplus store because she said it reminded her of my service days. She said I looked handsome in it, like the young soldier she married in 1989. To Sandra, it was just old rags. To me, it was my armor. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and put the candy back in my pocket. This was the pattern. Constant humiliation disguised as helpful suggestions. Sandra had been doing this for years, ever since she married Anthony. She had convinced him that his father was a liability to their social status. I sat there for an hour, invisible, watching my son play the big shot. He was boasting about deals he didn't close and profits he didn't earn. He didn't know that I review the company ledgers every Sunday night in my real office at the lakeside penthouse. I knew the company was bleeding cash because he was siphoning funds for personal expenses. $8,000 monthly for the house, $2,500 for car payments, $2,200 for his country club membership, and another $3,000 for what he categorized as business development. But what I knew were his gambling debts and luxury purchases. I had been covering the losses from my private trust to keep the 47 employees from losing their jobs. Good men and women who worked hard and deserved better than having their livelihoods threatened by my son's incompetence. Dinner was served at 6 p.m. sharp. The table was set with china and silver, a $4,000 dining set I had purchased through the house account 2 years ago. I was placed at the far end near the kitchen door, like a servant waiting to be dismissed. The conversation flowed around me, ignoring me like a rock in a stream. They talked about vacations in Cabo, trips I unknowingly funded through Anthony's inflated expense reports. They discussed the new country club membership, a $25,000 initiation fee I had covered when Anthony claimed it was essential for business networking. They debated cryptocurrency investments and Tesla stock options, speaking with the confidence of people who had never risked their own money. Anthony dominated the conversation, talking loudly about oil futures and market projections. The key, he said, cutting his turkey with theatrical precision, is understanding global supply chains. Most people don't realize how complex the petroleum equipment industry really is. I almost choked on my cornbread. This from a man who couldn't change his own oil, whose understanding of the business came from PowerPoint presentations created by others. Meanwhile, the guests nodded appreciatively, impressed by his apparent expertise. "Tell them about the Henderson deal, honey," Sandra prompted, her eyes gleaming with pride. Anthony's chest puffed up. "Well, we just closed a $2.3 million contract with Henderson Drilling. Took months of negotiation, but I finally convinced them our equipment was worth the premium pricing. I knew the Henderson deal intimately. I had personally flown to Houston 3 times to meet with their executives. I had used my Gulf War connections, men I had served with who now held key positions in major oil companies. The deal happened because of my relationships and my reputation for quality, built over 30 years in the industry. Anthony had simply signed the papers I put in front of him. But tonight, in this warm dining room, surrounded by his admirers, he was the hero of the story. He was the brilliant CEO who had built this success from nothing. "Your father must be proud," one of the guests said, glancing in my direction, "having a son accomplish so much." Anthony's laugh was sharp and cold. "Oh, the old man doesn't really understand business. He's more comfortable with wrenches and grease than balance sheets. Aren't you, Dad?" All eyes turned to me. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished, son." "What I've accomplished," Anthony repeated, emphasizing each word. "That's right. Self-made success. Nobody handed me anything." The irony was suffocating. At that moment, sitting in the house I owned, eating food I had paid for, wearing clothes purchased with money from the company I had built, Anthony was lecturing the room about self-reliance. When the dessert was served, pecan pie from a bakery that cost $40 per slice, Anthony cleared his throat. The room went quiet. He looked at me with that predatory smile I had come to recognize. "So, Dad," he started, swirling his brandy in a crystal snifter, "Sandra and I have been discussing some investment opportunities, really exciting stuff. Tesla stock, cryptocurrency, maybe some real estate development." I cut a small piece of my pie, my hands steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. I knew where this was heading. "The thing is," Anthony continued, "we need some liquidity to take advantage of these opportunities. You know how it is, timing is everything in business." The guests leaned forward slightly. This was getting interesting. "We need $50,000, Anthony said, his voice casual as if he were asking for the salt. "Just a short-term loan. We know you've been sitting on Mom's life insurance money, and frankly, it's just gathering dust in some low-yield savings account." The table went silent except for the soft clink of silverware against china. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. "I don't have $50,000 to lend, Anthony," I said quietly. Anthony's mask slipped for just a moment. His jaw tightened. "Come on, Dad, don't play games. Mom's policy was for $75,000. You've been hoarding it for 4 years. That money is for emergencies," I said, "not for speculation." Sandra let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "Emergencies? Ted, look around. Look at your son's success. This is an emergency. The emergency of missing out on generational wealth because you're too scared to take risks." She gestured at the opulent dining room, at Anthony's expensive suit, at the life of luxury surrounding us. "You raised a winner, Ted. The least you can do is support his vision instead of holding him back with your Depression-era thinking. The guests shifted uncomfortably. This family drama was more than they had bargained for. Anthony leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge. You know what your problem is, old man? You think small. You've always thought small. That's why you're still driving that piece of junk truck while I'm running a multi-million-dollar operation. I live on a fixed income, I said. Social Security and my VA pension. You know this. Bullshit, Anthony snapped, and Sandra's eyes lit up with vindictive pleasure. You're sitting on that insurance money like a dragon hoarding gold. Mom would have wanted you to help your family, not clutch those dollars until they bury you with them. The mention of Margaret hit me like a physical blow. Anthony invoking his dead mother's name to justify his greed was a line I never thought he'd cross. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my fork. Don't speak about your mother, I said, my voice low and controlled. She has nothing to do with this. Anthony sensed weakness and pounced. She has everything to do with this. Mom believed in family helping family. She would have wanted me to succeed, not watch you sabotage my future because you're too paranoid to take calculated risks. He was rewriting history in real time. Margaret had been the voice of reason in our house, constantly warning me that our deception would backfire. During her final months, when the chemotherapy made her too weak to work, she had begged me to tell Anthony the truth. He needs to understand what real sacrifice looks like, she had whispered from her hospital bed. You're going to create a monster, Ted, a man who thinks success comes without cost. But I had been stubborn. I thought I could teach him humility through hardship, even if that hardship was manufactured. I thought when the time came, when I finally revealed the truth, he would appreciate the lesson. I thought he would thank me for making him strong. Instead, I had created this, a 35-year-old man sitting in luxury I provided, demanding more money while insulting the father who had given him everything. You want to know what Mom would think? I said, my voice rising slightly. She'd be ashamed of you, ashamed of how you treat your family, ashamed of how you've forgotten where you came from. Anthony's face flushed red. The guests at the table were now openly uncomfortable, some checking their phones, others studying their dessert plates with intense fascination. Where I came from? Anthony laughed, but there was no humor in it. I came from poverty, Dad. From a father who was too proud to admit he couldn't provide for his family. From watching my mother work herself to death while you pretended fixing pipes made you some kind of hero. That was another lie. Margaret had worked as a school administrator because she loved education, not because we needed the money. Her salary went into a college fund for Anthony that he never knew existed. But in Anthony's revisionist history, we had been desperately poor, and his success was proof of his superiority over his circumstances. You think you're some kind of war hero? Anthony continued, his voice getting louder. But you were just a mechanic, a grease monkey who spent a year in the desert changing oil filters. Meanwhile, I built a real career. I made something of myself despite having you as a role model. Sandra was nodding along, her eyes bright with malicious satisfaction. This was the moment she had been engineering for months, maybe years. She had been poisoning Anthony against me, convincing him that his success was being held back by his embarrassing father. Anthony, one of the guests said uncomfortably, maybe we should... No, Anthony cut him off. You need to understand what kind of man my father really is. A selfish, bitter old man who resents his son's success because it makes his own failures look pathetic. I stood up slowly. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind was crystal clear. I have given you everything, son. Everything you have, everything you are, came from my work, my sacrifice. Your work? Anthony erupted from his chair. What work? You welded pipes. You fixed trucks. You think that's work? I run a $20 million company. I make decisions that affect dozens of employees. I negotiate deals worth millions of dollars. Your work was a joke compared to what I do every day. The irony was staggering. He was describing my company, my employees, my deals. Every $1 million contract he had signed bore my fingerprints. Every major decision went through me. But in his mind, he was the architect of this success, and I was just an old man living on memories of military service. You have a roof over your head, I said, my voice shaking with controlled rage. You have food on your table. You have cars in your driveway. You have a job. I earned those things, Anthony screamed. I earned every damn dollar, and I'm tired of you acting like I owe you something for the privilege of being my father. The room went dead silent. Even Sandra looked shocked by the venom in his voice. You want to know what you are to me? Anthony continued, pointing his finger at my chest. You're a burden, a weight around my neck. I carry you because I'm a good son, not because you deserve it. He stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. You come here to my house, eat my food, drink my wine, and have the nerve to judge how I spend my money. You're nothing, old man. You're a has-been who peaked at 25 and has been coasting on military stories ever since. I looked into his eyes and saw no recognition, no love, no respect. I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. I will not give you $50,000, I said quietly. Not for cars, not for investments, not for anything. And that's when Anthony gathered the saliva in his mouth and spit directly into my face. A glob of warm saliva landed on my cheek and slid down toward my chin. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum that seemed to suck all sound and movement from the world. No one moved. No one breathed. My grandchildren were watching from the doorway, their eyes wide with terror. Sandra was smirking, a small vindictive smile playing on her lips. The dinner guests sat frozen, their faces masks of shock and embarrassment. Anthony stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to shout, to cry, to beg. He expected the weak old man. He expected the father who would forgive anything. He expected me to wipe my face, apologize for upsetting him, and quietly agree to write the check. But that father died in that chair. I didn't wipe the spit off. I let it sit there on my skin, a wet, burning brand of disrespect. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the man I had carried on my shoulders when he was 5, the boy I had taught to change a tire when he was 16, the young man I had secretly protected from financial ruin 3 different times in his 20s. I saw a stranger. The transformation in my mind was instant and complete. This wasn't my son anymore. This was just another person who had taken advantage of my generosity and mistaken my kindness for weakness. In 30 years of business, I had dealt with plenty of people like that. I knew exactly how to handle them. I picked up my napkin from beside my plate. I folded it neatly, precisely, and placed it on the table. I did not look at the horrified guests. I did not look at Sandra, whose smirk was beginning to fade as she realized something fundamental had just shifted in the room. I did not look at my grandchildren. I stood up and turned my back on my son. "Get out!" Anthony screamed behind me. His voice was high and sharp, panic creeping into his anger. "Get out and don't come back until you have my money. Don't you dare walk away from me, old man. I'm not finished with you." I walked to the hallway. Each step was deliberate and controlled. I put on my heavy leather coat, Margaret's final gift to me. I buttoned it up slowly. My fingers were steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. "Ted!" Sandra called out. Her voice had lost its mocking edge. "Ted, come back here. Let's talk about this like adults." Anthony didn't mean... I opened the heavy oak front door. The Dallas winter hit me like a slap, but it felt clean. It felt like freedom. Behind me, I could hear Anthony still yelling. "That's right. Run away. Run away like you always do when things get difficult. You're pathetic, old man. Pathetic and useless." I walked down the long driveway, past the Range Rover I was making payments on, past the perfectly manicured lawn I was paying to maintain. I didn't look back at the house that bore my name on the deed. I didn't look back at the warm glow of the windows that my electricity bill kept lit. The cold was biting through my boots, but my mind had achieved a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Each breath of frigid air seemed to burn away the fog of family obligation that had clouded my judgment for so long. I walked 4 blocks to the nearest bus stop. As I waited in the freezing darkness, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Not the cheap flip phone I used for show, but my real phone. The encrypted smartphone that connected me to my business empire. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. It rang twice. "Patterson Law Firm, Kenneth speaking." The voice was deep and familiar. Kenneth Patterson was the most expensive, ruthless corporate lawyer in Dallas, and he was the only man outside of my accounting team who knew the full extent of my assets. "Kenneth," I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears. It sounded like the voice of the man who had built a $2.8 million company from nothing. "It's time. Ted?" Time for what? Clause 13. There was a long pause on the line. Kenneth knew what Clause 13 was. We had written it into the trust documents a decade ago as a nuclear option, a fail-safe mechanism that would allow me to completely sever all financial ties to Anthony if the situation ever became untenable. Are you certain? Kenneth asked, his voice dropping an octave. Clause 13 is scorched earth, Ted. It triggers immediate eviction proceedings. It freezes all company accounts tied to his name. It cancels every credit line, every lease, every financial instrument connected to the beneficiary. Once I execute this, there's no going back. I touched my cheek. The spit had begun to freeze in the cold air. I'm certain. What triggered this? He spit in my face. Another pause. In front of witnesses, in front of his dinner guests, his wife, his children. That's assault, Ted. We could pursue criminal charges. No, I said. I don't want him in jail. I want him to understand what he's lost. I want him to feel what it's like to earn his own way for once in his life. Understood. Give me 30 minutes to pull the files. Where do you want to start? Execute it tonight. Power cut off by midnight. Bank accounts frozen by morning. Eviction team at dawn. Consider it done, Kenneth said. Where will you go? I looked up at the dark sky, snow beginning to fall in heavy flakes. I'm going to the lake house. The lake house was a property I owned on White Rock Lake, a 3,000-square-foot glass and steel retreat that Anthony didn't know existed. It had been empty for years, waiting for a day I had hoped would never come. Tonight, it would become my command center. I hung up the phone. I finally took a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped my face. I looked at the cloth, stained with the betrayal of my own blood. I dropped it into the trash can next to the bus stop and watched it disappear into the darkness. The bus arrived 20 minutes later. I stepped on and sat in the back. As the city lights blurred past the window, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the heavy, grinding gears of justice starting to turn. My son wanted to be a self-made man. Tomorrow morning, he would get his chance. He would wake up in a house he didn't own, with a job he didn't have, and bank accounts that didn't exist. The ride to White Rock Lake took 45 minutes. I got off at the marina stop and walked the final quarter mile to the lakefront towers. The night security guard, a man named George who had worked there for 15 years, looked up from his desk. He saw the old coat, the tired eyes, the weathered face. He started to stand up to tell me I was in the wrong place. Then he recognized me. "Mr. Pierce," he said, surprise clear in his voice. "We haven't seen you in almost 2 years. It's been a long time, George," I said. "I need the key to the penthouse." He scrambled to his desk drawer. "Of course, sir. Right away. Welcome home." I took the elevator to the 20th floor. The doors opened into my real home, not the cramped apartment I maintained for show, but a sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the lake. It smelled of leather and wood polish. The air was crisp and clean. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dallas spread out below me like a circuit board, millions of lights connected in an intricate web of power and commerce. Somewhere out there in the suburbs, Anthony was probably laughing with his guests, drinking wine I had paid for, thinking he had finally put the old man in his place. He had no idea that the old man was about to become his worst nightmare. I walked to my study and powered up the computer system. Not a single desktop, but 3 monitors connected to servers that managed my financial empire. I logged into the master control account for Pierce Holdings. The screen flickered to life, displaying numbers that would have shocked Anthony into silence. $2.8 million in liquid assets, real estate holdings worth $4.2 million, and a business generating $800,000 in annual profit. Then I opened the sub-accounts, the financial life support system that had kept Anthony living like a king. Monthly utilities for the house, $850. Property insurance, $350 monthly. Landscaping service, $800. Car lease payments, $200 for the Range Rover, $950 for Sandra's BMW. Country club membership, $500 monthly. Credit cards with $75,000 in combined limits, all paid automatically from my accounts. For 12 years, I had been Anthony's invisible benefactor, the anonymous force that made his luxury lifestyle possible. He thought success meant having money. He was about to learn that success meant earning money. I clicked on the Utilities Management tab. The interface showed me every property connected to Pierce Holdings. I selected 4851 Preston Road, Anthony's address. Under Service Status, I clicked the drop-down menu and selected Terminate Service, Immediate. A confirmation dialog appeared. Warning: this action will disconnect all utilities within 4 hours. Reconnection requires new account establishment and credit approval. Proceed? I clicked Confirm. Next, I opened the banking interface. Anthony's checking account, which he believed was tied to his corporate salary, showed a balance of $12,000. His savings account held another $8,000. I selected both accounts and clicked Freeze, Suspected Fraudulent Activity. Another confirmation. Warning: account freeze prevents all transactions, including automatic payments, debit card usage, and check processing. Requires management review to reverse. Proceed. I clicked Confirm. The credit cards came next. 5 cards with a combined limit of $75,000, all backed by my corporate guarantee. I systematically canceled each one. The system prompted me to provide a reason. I selected account holder termination for each. Finally, I opened the vehicle leasing portal. Anthony's Range Rover and Sandra's BMW appeared on the screen with their GPS locations, mileage reports, and payment status. I initiated repossession orders for both vehicles, scheduling pickup for 8 a.m. the next morning. The entire process took 23 minutes. 23 minutes to systematically dismantle a lifestyle that had taken 12 years to build. I sat back in my leather chair and poured myself a glass of water from the mini refrigerator in my desk. It tasted clean and cold. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my own life. Now came the waiting. I knew exactly when the phone would start ringing. It would happen when the lights went out, when the heat stopped flowing, when reality crashed through the walls of their carefully constructed fantasy. I didn't have to wait long. The sun rose over Dallas the next morning, but the heat inside Anthony's ranch house did not. I knew the exact moment the power grid severed its connection to my son's house because I was watching the utility dashboard on my laptop screen from the 20th floor. At 6:00 a.m. precisely, the status light for the property at 4851 Preston Road turned from green to red. Disconnected. I sat in my leather chair holding a cup of black coffee, imagining the scene unfolding 15 miles away. The ranch house relied on a central air and heating system that required constant electricity to circulate warm air through the 4,000-square-foot structure. Without it, the house was just an expensive pile of freezing brick and mortar. I pictured Anthony waking up shivering under his Egyptian cotton sheets, reaching for the digital thermostat and finding the screen blank. He would try the light switches next, clicking them repeatedly as if sheer repetition could restore power. He would check the circuit breakers, then call the electric company, growing increasingly agitated as he realized this wasn't a neighborhood outage. My phone began to buzz on the mahogany desk at 6:47 a.m. It was Anthony. I let it ring through to voicemail. I took another sip of coffee and watched the screen. He called 6 times in rapid succession, each call going unanswered. I wanted him to sit in the cold a little longer. I wanted the reality of his situation to settle into his bones like the morning frost. According to the GPS tracker on his company-leased Range Rover, which I monitored through the fleet management system, he left the house at 7:20 a.m. He was probably heading to his favorite coffee shop, desperate for warmth and caffeine before confronting me. I switched tabs on my computer to the corporate credit card portal. This was where the real education would begin. Anthony used this card for everything: gas, coffee, groceries, dry cleaning. He categorized them as business expenses. But I knew better. They were the financial umbilical cord that connected him to my resources. I watched the transaction log populate in real time. 7:25 a.m. Shell Station, Preston Road. Transaction attempt, $6,500. Status, declined. Code, account closed. 7:26 a.m. Shell Station, Preston Road. Transaction attempt, $6,500. Status, declined. Code, account closed. 7:27 a.m. Shell Station, Preston Road. Transaction attempt, $20,100. Status, declined. Code, account closed. I could see him in my mind standing at the pump in his expensive suit, desperately trying different payment methods while other customers waited behind him. The humiliation would be public and immediate. 7:30 a.m. Starbucks, North Dallas. Transaction attempt, $8.50. Status, declined. Code, account closed. That decline would hurt worse than the gas. Gas was necessity. The $8 coffee was his daily ritual, his mark of success. Being told he couldn't afford a cup of coffee was a psychological blow that matched the physical slap he had given me. At 7:45 a.m., my phone rang again. This time I answered on the first ring. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Anthony screamed before I could say hello. His voice was high and strained, panic mixing with his usual arrogance. "The power is out at the house, the heating system is down. The kids were freezing when they woke up, Ted. And now my cards aren't working. Did you forget to pay the bills again, you senile old fool?" I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the gray Dallas skyline. The silence in my penthouse was absolute, the silence of total control. "I didn't forget anything, Anthony," I said calmly. "Then fix it," he yelled. "Call the power company, call the bank. I'm standing in a Starbucks parking lot looking like an idiot. I have 3 meetings today. Fix this right now, or I swear to God, I'll drive over there and throw your stuff out on the street." "You can't throw my stuff out, son," I said quietly, "because you don't own the house." There was a pause on the line, a heavy, confused silence that stretched for nearly 10 seconds. "What are you talking about?" Anthony's voice had dropped to a whisper. "Of course I own the house. I've lived there for 12 years. I have mortgage papers. I have equity. You have a lease agreement," I corrected him, "with Pierce Holdings, LLC. And as of last night, that lease has been terminated." "Pierce Holdings?" He was struggling to process the information. That's the management company. They just handle the paperwork for the bank." "Anthony," I said, my voice taking on the tone I had once used to explain basic concepts to him as a child. "Pierce Holdings isn't a management company. It's my company. I am Pierce Holdings. I own the house you live in. I own the cars you drive. I own the business where you collect a paycheck. And I own the credit cards you just tried to use." The silence that followed was different. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was the sound of a man's entire worldview collapsing in real time. "You're lying," he finally whispered. "You're a retired welder. You live in that shitty apartment. You clip coupons. You don't have any money." "I live in that apartment because I want you to believe I'm poor," I said. "The coupons, the old truck, the work clothes, it's all theater, Anthony. I've been playing a role for 12 years. Waiting for you to show me that you understood the value of what I was giving you." "No." His voice was getting stronger, more desperate. "No. You're having some kind of breakdown. You're confused. The company trust pays for everything. The accounts are corporate accounts. You just handle the paperwork. Check your email, Anthony." "What?" "Check your corporate email. There should be a message from the board of directors." I heard him fumbling with his phone, the sound of tapping on the screen. Then I heard him gasp. "Termination of employment, effective immediately," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Reason: gross misconduct and misappropriation of corporate funds." "The board of directors," I said, "is me, Kenneth Patterson, and my accountant. We voted unanimously last night." "This is impossible," Anthony said. But his voice had lost all conviction. "This is all impossible." "The impossible part," I said, "is that it took me 35 years to realize what kind of man I raised." I hung up the phone and turned my attention back to the computer. The next phase was already in motion, and this one would cut Sandra deeper than anything that had happened so far. I turned my attention to the vehicle tracking system. This was where Sandra would receive her education about the difference between earning and receiving. Anthony cared about power and status, but Sandra lived for appearances. She measured her worth by the envy she generated in other mothers at the country club and school pickup lines. I opened the GPS tracking interface for the fleet management system. 2 vehicles appeared on my screen. Anthony's Range Rover, currently parked at a Starbucks in North Dallas, where he was probably still trying to process his termination, and Sandra's pearl white BMW X5. According to the location data, her car was moving south on Preston Road toward the children's private school. Perfect timing. I called the repossession company I had contracted with years ago when I started the vehicle leasing subsidiary. The owner, Carl Martinez, had served in the same Gulf War unit as me. He understood the importance of precision and discretion in his work. "Pierce Oil Equipment," Carl answered on the second ring. "Carl, it's Ted. Operation Cleanup is a go. Copy that. We have eyes on the BMW at Hillcrest Preparatory School. Subject is in the pickup line. We're positioned 2 cars behind her. Execute when you have a clear field. Make it public. Understood. Full visibility protocol. I switched to the school's security camera feed, a system I had helped fund through an anonymous donor program 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to watch Sandra's humiliation through cameras I had paid for. The BMW was third in line at the school's circular drive. Sandra sat behind the wheel, probably checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, preparing for her daily performance as the successful executive's wife. She had no idea that her husband had just been fired from a company he never owned. At 8:15 a.m., Carl's tow truck rounded the corner of the school driveway. It wasn't subtle. The diesel engine rumbled loudly, backup lights flashing, hydraulic systems whining as it maneuvered into position directly behind Sandra's BMW. I watched through the security monitor as other parents began rolling down their windows, phones appearing as they sensed drama unfolding. The private school pickup line was a theater of suburban status warfare, and today Sandra was about to become the main attraction. Carl stepped out of the truck wearing his company coveralls and safety vest. He didn't approach Sandra's window for a polite conversation. He walked directly to the front of the BMW and began connecting the towing apparatus to the vehicle's frame. Sandra's door flew open immediately. Even through the grainy security footage, I could see her fury and confusion. She was probably screaming something like, "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? This is a $65,000 vehicle." Carl handed her the clipboard without looking up from his work. The repossession order was clear and legally binding. Vehicle return required due to lease termination. Authorized by Pierce Leasing LLC, effective immediately. What happened next was even better than I had imagined. Sandra began gesticulating wildly, pointing at the school, at her children who were now watching from inside the building, at the other parents who were recording every moment. This wasn't just a car repossession. It was the public destruction of her carefully constructed image. The BMW began to lift off the ground, rear wheels leaving the pavement as the hydraulic system engaged. Sandra was left standing on the asphalt in her designer heels, holding a piece of paper that legally stripped away her primary status symbol. My phone rang. It was Sandra. "Ted!" she screamed before I could speak. "What have you done? They just took my car! In front of everyone! The school! The other mothers! They're filming this!" "Good morning, Sandra," I said calmly. "I trust you received the repossession paperwork." "Repossession? Ted, this is some kind of mistake. Call them off right now. This is embarrassing beyond belief. Do you understand what you've done to my reputation?" "I understand perfectly," I said. "You're experiencing what it feels like when someone else controls your access to things you thought you owned." "I do own that car. We've been paying on it for 2 years. Actually, you haven't paid a single dollar. Pierce Leasing LLC has been making the payments. And as of last night, that lease was terminated." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear car engines idling, children's voices, and what sounded like someone crying. "Pierce Leasing," Sandra repeated slowly. That's Anthony's company." "No, Sandra. That's my company. It's a subsidiary of Pierce Holdings, which is also my company. The BMW was never yours. It was a company vehicle provided as a benefit to the wife of an employee. As of this morning, Anthony is no longer an employee." "This is impossible," she whispered. "You're a welder. You live in that terrible apartment. You don't have a company." "I have several companies, Sandra. I've been watching you and Anthony play house with my money for 12 years, waiting for one of you to show some appreciation or respect for what you had been given. Instead, you convinced my son to spit in my face." "We can fix this," Sandra said, her voice taking on a desperate, pleading tone. "Ted, we can work this out. Anthony was upset last night. He didn't mean what he said. We all say things we don't mean when we're emotional." "When you're emotional," I corrected her. "Most people don't assault their elderly father at a family dinner." "It wasn't assault. It was just spit. It's not like he hit you." The casualness of her response told me everything I needed to know about how they had discussed the incident after I left. In their version of events, Anthony's behavior was understandable, maybe even justified. I was the unreasonable old man who had overreacted to a minor family squabble. "Just spit," I repeated. "Sandra, that just spit cost you your house, your cars, and your husband's career. I'd say that makes it the most expensive saliva in Texas history. You can't do this to us," she said. but her voice had lost its commanding tone. "We have children. We have commitments. We have a life here." "You had a life that I was paying for," I said. "Now you'll have to build a life you can afford." I hung up and watched the security monitor as Sandra stood alone in the school parking lot, holding the repossession papers while the other parents drove away, their phones full of videos that would be shared throughout Dallas's social media networks within hours. The next call came 20 minutes later. It was Anthony again, and this time his voice had changed completely. "Dad!" Anthony's voice was barely above a whisper when I answered the phone. Gone was the arrogant CEO who had spit in my face 18 hours earlier. This was the voice of a broken man. "Dad, please. We need to talk." "We are talking, Anthony." "No, I mean in person. Face to face. I'm coming to your apartment." I almost smiled. "You can try, but I'm not there." "Where are you?" "I'm at home, son. My real home." There was a long pause. "I don't understand what's happening. This morning I woke up and my entire life was gone. No power, no money, no job, no cars. Sandra is hysterical. The kids are asking why mommy is crying. I need you to explain this to me. You want an explanation?" I leaned back in my leather chair, looking out at White Rock Lake. "Here's your explanation. For 12 years I have been your silent partner in a lie. I pretended to be poor, so you would learn the value of hard work. Instead, you learned to despise the man who was secretly funding your entire existence." "But you are poor," Anthony said, confusion evident in his voice. "You live in that rundown apartment. You shop with coupons. You drive that piece of shit truck. Anthony, I'm going to tell you something that's going to change how you see the world. That apartment costs me $800 a month to maintain as a prop. The truck is registered to one of my shell companies for tax purposes. The coupons save me about $30 a week, which I donate to charity because I think it's funny." I pulled up my banking interface on the computer screen. "Would you like to know my net worth, son?" "Stop calling me son," he said, but there was no anger left in his voice, only exhaustion. "Fair enough. Anthony, my liquid assets total $2.8 million. My real estate holdings are worth $4.2 million. My business generates approximately $800,000 in annual profit. I am, by any reasonable definition, wealthy." The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. I could hear him breathing, processing this information. "That's impossible," he finally said. "If you have that much money, why did you let me struggle? Why did you watch me stress about mortgage payments and car loans? You never struggled, Anthony. I made sure of that. What you experienced was the illusion of struggle while living in complete luxury. Every mortgage payment, every car loan, every utility bill, every country club membership, I paid for all of it. But I worked for those things. I earned my salary. You earned a salary from a company I own for doing work that could be handled by any competent college graduate. The major contracts, the client relationships, the strategic decisions, those came from me. You were a figurehead with a fancy title. You're lying." "Am I? Tell me about the Henderson contract you bragged about last night, the $2.3 million deal you claimed to have negotiated." Anthony was quiet. "I flew to Houston 3 times to meet with their executives," I continued. "I used relationships I built during my military service, men I served with in the Gulf who now hold key positions in oil companies. The deal happened because they trust Ted Pierce, not because they were impressed with Anthony Pierce." "Why?" Anthony's voice cracked. "Why would you do this to me?" "I didn't do this to you, Anthony. I did this for you. I wanted to teach you that success requires sacrifice, that respect must be earned, that family means supporting each other through difficult times. Instead, you learned that success means having money appear magically in your accounts, that respect means nothing if you have enough cash, and that family exists to serve your needs." "I can change," he said quickly. "Dad, I can learn. I can do better. Just turn everything back on. Give me another chance. Another chance to do what? Spit in my face. Again? Call me a burden? Tell your friends I'm just a grease monkey who got lucky? I was angry. I was drunk. I didn't mean those things." "You meant every word," I said, "and more importantly, you felt justified saying them. In your mind, I was standing between you and money that rightfully belonged to you. You saw me as an obstacle to overcome, not a father to respect." "What do you want from me?" Anthony asked. "Do you want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I disrespected you. I'm sorry I took you for granted. I'm sorry I spit on you. Is that what you need to hear? Anthony, you're apologizing because your lifestyle disappeared, not because you understand what you did wrong. If I turned everything back on right now, how long do you think it would be before you started treating me like hired help again? He didn't answer because we both knew the truth. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. In 3 days, the sheriff will arrive at the house to execute an eviction order. You'll have until then to remove your personal belongings. After that, anything left behind becomes property of the bank. Eviction? Dad, please, we have nowhere to go. You're 35 years old, Anthony. You have a college degree and 12 years of management experience. You'll figure it out. The kids' school, Sandra's social obligations, our whole life is here. Your whole life was built on my money and my generosity. Now you get to build a life based on your own efforts and abilities. I don't know how to do that. Then you'll learn. The same way I learned when I came back from the Gulf with $2,000 in a dream. The same way millions of people learn every day when they have to support themselves and their families. Please, Anthony whispered. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Anthony, I said, my voice softening slightly. This is the greatest gift I could ever give you. The chance to become a man who earns what he has instead of taking what someone else provides. I hung up the phone and turned off the ringer. It was time for the final phase. 3 days later, I stood on the balcony of my lake house penthouse, watching the snow fall on Dallas for what I knew would be the last time. It was heavy, wet snow that covered everything in a blanket of silence. But down on Preston Road, 20 miles away, there was no silence. There was only the sound of desperation. Through the real-time security feed from the house cameras, I watched as the sheriff's department arrived at 4851 Preston Road to execute the eviction order. 2 squad cars, a white van from the county, and a moving truck I had hired to collect anything of value that would remain after Anthony and Sandra's departure. Anthony and Sandra were on the front lawn, kneeling in the snow beside their suitcases. They looked nothing like the arrogant socialites who had hosted Thanksgiving dinner just 4 days ago. Anthony's expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. Sandra's designer clothes were disheveled, her makeup streaked from days of crying. They had lost everything. The house, the cars, the country club membership, the private school tuition for the children, the credit cards, the bank accounts. But more than that, they had lost their identity. They were no longer the successful executive and his sophisticated wife. They were just 2 people who had never learned to build anything for themselves. I watched as the sheriff handed Anthony the final paperwork. Behind them, movers were carrying furniture out of the house. Furniture I had purchased, from a home I had bought, filled with belongings I had funded. Everything they thought they owned was being systematically removed and inventoried. My phone buzzed one final time. It was a text message from Anthony. Dad, please, the kids are crying. Sandra's sister won't let us stay more than a week. We have nothing. Please call me back. I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. I picked up my suitcase, a simple black bag containing everything I truly needed. Inside were my military discharge papers, Margaret's wedding ring, a photo of Anthony as a child, and 3 changes of clothes. Everything else in the lake house would remain, another layer of the life I was leaving behind. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the first-class cabin of a Southwest Airlines flight to Billings, Montana. The flight attendant offered me champagne, but I declined. I wanted to experience this moment with complete clarity. As the plane lifted off from Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, I looked down at the city spread out below me like a circuit board of lights. Somewhere in that grid was the oil equipment company I had built, now being run by competent managers I had hired years ago. Somewhere down there was the empty lake house that had served as my command center. And somewhere down there was my former son, learning for the first time in his life what it meant to be responsible for his own survival. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I felt the profound peace that comes from finally living in alignment with your values. The ranch I had purchased in Montana was 200 acres of rolling hills outside Billings, with a modest 3-bedroom house and a barn that needed repair. I had bought it 6 months earlier through a shell company, the same way I had acquired everything else. But this property was different. This property was for me. When I arrived at the ranch, I didn't hire contractors to fix the barn. I didn't call a landscaping service to maintain the property. I put on my work clothes, the same type I had worn as a young man building my empire, and I started working with my hands again. The physical labor felt like coming home. Every morning I would wake up before dawn and spend the day repairing fences, caring for the small herd of cattle I had purchased, and slowly restoring the buildings on the property. My hands became calloused again. My back ached in the evening. I slept the deep sleep of exhaustion. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't worried about maintaining a facade. I wasn't monitoring bank accounts or covering someone else's mistakes. I wasn't pretending to be poor while secretly funding a lifestyle built on lies. I was just Ted Pierce, a 62-year-old man who had earned his peace through hard work and difficult decisions. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyer. It was from Anthony, postmarked from Shreveport, Louisiana. Inside was a single page, handwritten, "Dad, I got a job at an oil service company. Starting wage, but it's honest work. Sandra left me and took the kids to her mother's in Ohio. I'm living in a studio apartment and learning to cook for myself. I wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll be proud that your lessons finally took hold. Anthony." I read the letter twice, then placed it in my desk drawer next to Margaret's wedding ring. I never responded. Some lessons are more powerful when they stand alone. That evening I sat on the porch of my ranch house watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple. The cattle were settling in for the night, and the only sounds were the wind through the grass and the distant call of a hawk. I learned that you cannot buy respect, no matter how much you pay. By shielding my son from consequences for so long, I didn't help him. I crippled him. True love isn't about giving someone everything they want. It's about teaching them how to earn what they need. I also learned that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. Blood makes you related, but respect makes you family. If someone treats you like a burden, remove the weight from their shoulders and walk away. Peace, I discovered, is the only luxury that's truly priceless. The spit that hit my face that Thanksgiving night cost my son $2.8 million. But it gave me something worth far more than money. It gave me back myself.